welcome to the Sound Arguments Podcast. Thanks for being here. I'm glad that you found us. However you may have stumbled upon our show, just glad that you are here and you're ready to engage. So first, before we get started, I think maybe you'll notice this is episode 000, which is my way of indicating that this is not really actually an episode. This is an introduction of sorts. I wanted to present the concept of what this podcast is going to be, but also introduce myself to you as the host and talk about a couple of things that are going to be coming up here in the next couple of weeks. So the first thing that I want to be sure to mention is just obviously the name, Sound Arguments. It's a little bit of a double entendre. Obviously, if you're someone who is trying to form a sound argument, it's an argument that is sound. It can be reasoned out to be found true. The second piece of Sound Arguments is obviously this is a sound podcast. You're listening to the sound of my voice, and while I don't intend on getting into any arguments, I do intend to use this platform as a catalyst for some relevant, reasonable, and productive discussion about things that matter. I believe that the reality of our world in this digital age is that a lot of these conversations about things that matter are taking place on new platforms. They're taking place in new places. In the past, I think that a lot of these questions that people had and they would debate amongst themselves, it would happen over the dinner table or over a cup of coffee, at the water cooler even maybe 50, 60 years ago. But that is just not the case in our modern world. We're becoming more interconnected on the internet. And so a lot of these discussions are happening on the internet. And that's great, because more people can get in on the conversation, but the downside of that is that your side of the conversation, your contribution, has to happen in 140 characters on Twitter, or has to happen asynchronously with the person that you're having the conversation with over computer-mediated communication. It's not happening in a timeline where someone is saying something to you and you're immediately responding back to them. All of these things just mean that we have to find new ways to have these really important conversations. And this podcast is simply me trying to help figure that out. For me personally, the reason that I want to start this podcast is because I believe in a couple of things really strongly. For one, I believe in the value of discourse and discussion. I think it makes the world a better place. At least it has the potential to. I also believe in the freedom that we experience, the freedom to have an idea and express it, and someone else's freedom to say, hey, I disagree with you. The ability to have that open discussion, even in a public forum, much less privately on the internet between a couple of people. I think that's really one of the things that Western civilization has given to society that's really puts it at the top of the list of the greatest human achievements. If it's not at the top, it's at least in the top handful. Just the freedom of being able to express your ideas without the fear that some larger entity than you that has more power than you is going to punish you for what you have to say. So in an effort to pursue trying to be a person who acts upon what they believe and stands by what they have come to understand as truth, or at least being someone who's willing to be challenged on their ideas, here I am. I think this is a great platform that is being more and more utilized every single day to have these kind of discussions and share ideas. So over the next couple of weeks, we got some really awesome topics that we're going to bring to you. These shows are already pretty much ready to go. We just have to put them through the production process. And before we do, I want to give you this opportunity to see what's coming ahead and maybe even get a head start on engaging in the conversation. Now, of course, in order to do that, you're going to have to know where to find us. There's a number of different places that you can reach out to us online, and the first of which is obviously Twitter. A lot of really meaningful discussion is happening on Twitter, and yes, it's happening in 140 character increments, but that doesn't mean that there can't be some really positive things that come out of those conversations. So if you get on Twitter and you search @SoundArguePod, I know it's not really a super awesome name. Maybe if this podcast gets big, I can get verified, and whoever owns the @SoundArguments handle will have to turn it over to me. I don't anticipate that happening. But in the meantime, you can find us at SoundArguePod on Twitter. I'm also on Gab. I'm not sure if a lot of you are familiar with Gab. It's gaining in popularity. It's something of a Twitter copycat. It was founded in response to some of the things that have been going on Twitter over the last couple of years. People get upset about their tweets being taken down because of offensive content, and I understand that. And maybe it's for another episode to debate what is actually offensive content and free speech and all of that. I'm sure we will get there. But if you're on Gab, you can check us out at Sound Arguments on Gab and engage with us there. And lastly, probably the best place to directly get a hold of us would be to send us an email, and that is at soundargumentspodcast@gmail.com. Again, soundargumentspodcast@gmail.com. You can reach out, maybe offer some insights or offer up some ideas for upcoming shows. We'd love to hear from you. So over the next couple of weeks, here's what we're going to be talking about. Episode 1 is going to talk about what it means to have an ideology. I want to deconstruct the notion of ideology a little bit, because we all have one, whether we really know it or not, or whether we think it's something that governs our behavior or not. We have an ideology, and it's important to navigate conversations from the standpoint of that realization. So that'll be episode 1. Look for that here in a couple of days. Episode 2 I'm especially excited for because I'm going to have a special guest with me in studio, my wife, and we're going to talk about anxiety and depression. I think those are 2 really important topics for us to discuss, especially as people of the millennial generation, as my wife and I are, and probably many of you listening. We're one of the most anxious subsections of society, one of the most anxious generations in history. We're one of the most connected interpersonally, albeit through the internet, but we have the highest levels of anxiety due to from a number of studies. So we're going to look at that. We're going to tackle that from a bit of a philosophical point of view and some of the philosophy that her and I have been reading and studying together and having discussions about it. We think it's really, really interesting. So look forward to that. After that, we're taking on Marxism. Again, back to the theories, the concepts of individuality versus a more collective society. We're going to tackle Marxism and how we can see what Marx had to say really coming through all the way down the line through the 20th century into our 21st century and affecting our culture today. And then episode 4 is going to look at higher education, not necessarily current events in higher education, Betsy DeVos, hot button, things like that are happening now, but more higher education as an institution. I've had a long academic history myself, full of ups and downs, so I'm going to get to tell you a little bit about my story, and we'll tackle that subject. And speaking of stories, that's going to be one of the things that you'll notice as a hallmark of this podcast, because I think that stories are a great way to illustrate points and get us to think on a different level about the topics that we're going to be discussing. So I'm always going to want to engage you with relevant discussion, but I'm also going to want to engage you with really interesting stories that draw you in and are hopefully kind of entertaining to listen to. So that is a picture of where we are going. I hope that you want to come along for the ride. I hope that you want to hop on Twitter and Gab and send me an email, whatever way you might want to connect with the show here in preparation for what is to come. Thanks for listening, and we will talk to you next time.